Good afternoon. Good afternoon, everyone. It is Thursday. It is 4 p.m. ET, and we are so delighted that you have found us here on A Mighty Blaze on Crime Time. I'm your host, Hank Phillippi Ryan, and I am welcoming you here today. I'm the USA Today bestselling author of 13 going on 14 novels of suspense, my current book, Her Perfect Life. I have it cleverly, casually slapped on the door behind me, and I hope you will enjoy that. My new book, and I will show you it right now, comes out in February, The House Guest, which is sort of Gaslight meets Thelma and Louise. So watch for that. We'll be talking about that here very soon. But today we are talking about this adorable, fantastic, charming, really, really thank you, Mia. Blackmail and Bibinka by Mia P. Manansala. A wonderful, thought provoking, charming, funny, cozy mystery, which has gotten rave reviews from everyone. And if you don't know what Babinka is that how you say it?
Yeah, Bibinka.
Babinka, you will know in about 30 seconds. Mia, welcome from Chicago suburbs.
Yes, yes.
And this is the third in the series, but are you just jaded about it now and la-di-da, it's just a new book? Or how do you feel? How did you feel when this came out in October?
It's still so strange because I debuted last year, so it's I still feel so new. Like like Hank, like I move behind me. Behind me is the cover to my debut novel, Arsenic and Adobo, which came out last May. So because I write cozies, they come out pretty quickly. So my second novel, titled Homicide and Hollow Hollow, came out in February. My third book, Blackmail and Bibinka, came out last month. So it's
So in
still
your spare
so
time,
new.
but I have right here the starred review of the book behind you, Arsenic and Adobo, from a starred review from Publishers Weekly that says, chock full of food lore, this delicious mystery will leave readers hungry for more. Cozy fans are in for a treat. What did you think when you saw that review?
you know, just getting like a trade review is like, oh wow, like they know that my book exists is like a huge thing. But starred reviews, for my debut especially, it was a very special moment to get that kind of like recognition and like an acknowledgement, like, oh, okay, so maybe I know what I'm doing, sort of.
Well, it isn't. I mean, I hear you, I mean, there was so much acclaim for you and this book, but what did you think? Not only that, oh my, you got noticed,
Mhm.
and that maybe you know what you're doing, but that the sort of wave of admiration and affection for the culture of the book, for the food writing of the book, for the mystery of the book. It's a life changing thing, isn't it?
Yeah, very much so. And what made it especially important to me was I wrote Arsenic and Adobo when I was on sub with the previous book that ultimately never got picked up. And a lot of the feedback I got on the previous novel that never sold was, she's got a great voice but no audience. Nobody's going to buy her books. And so I started to write something for fun, for me and for my mom, because my mom is the one who got me into mysteries in general, but the cozy mystery genre specifically. And I was like, okay, these rejections are kind of really beating me down. I'm going to write something fun and that me and my mom really love, because we love cozy mysteries, but we've never seen ourselves, represented in the page. So I'm going to write something for us. And the fact that I wrote something specifically for us that has gotten recognition for some, by trade reviews, other readers, and things like that. That's like, oh wow, that's something that was so close to my heart personally. Also had some mass appeal. Is very surprising.
And reassuring. I mean, who's us? You talk about for us. How would you describe
Yeah.
us?
Well, like to be literal, like me and my mom. But also just, for anyone who loves reading and has never seen themselves reflected on the page, due to them being part of a, historically underrepresented community, whether it's a ethnic background, your sexual identity, particular religions. um it's sometimes hard to feel like you don't exist, um because like a lot of what particularly for someone like me who's a big reader, a lot of what I learned from the world when I was a kid was through literature. and never seeing yourself reflected, it kind of makes it feel like you don't matter. You're like, oh, like I, like it's like, oh, I exist. And so these novels that are just fun, and they deal with food and family, and like, yes, they're about Filipino Americans, but they're not about being Filipino American. They just happen to be. There's a lot of like nuance that I'm kind of missing at the moment because I still have like holiday brain.
No, but I think I
yeah.
hear you because I think what you were saying was just so perfect because it's not about this Filipino family. It's about they just happen to be, and it's
Yeah.
important, but it's not the key. It's not the point.
Yes.
And you are brilliant at that. And we can talk about that in a minute. We were talking about it, you all in the green room before, about how Mia has this skill of bringing readers in and without explaining anything, lets you be part of the story. And I think that's part of the genius of your voice. It's captivating, it's endearing, it's engaging, it's, mind opening. And as I said before, it's life-changing. So let me quickly welcome you all. We could go on and on about this, and we will in a minute, but let me welcome, oh my golly, look at the people who are here today. Here is Brenda, who says, good, you seem to have found your niche. Yes, indeed. That is the niche for starred reviews. Got to love that. Susie Baldwin is here, and Janine Woodworth, and Darlene McElhaney is here, and Mary Garrett. This is great. And so Shannon Hansen, love to see you, Shannon. I know if so many people are here. When I look over here, you know that I'm looking at the comments and reading the comments. So I'm not being distracted. I'm being distracted by you. Mighty Blaze, Margaret in the back room is saying, I'll take a niche for starred reviews. That's going to get crowded and more crowded as your career goes on. I know that, Mia. If you are new to Crime Time, if you are new to A Mighty Blaze, you should know that A Mighty Blaze was started 2.5 years ago now by the fabulous Jenna Blum and Caroline Levitt to keep us reading during the pandemic and keep us learning about new authors and discovering new books and having new experiences. And that is exactly what we do here on Crime Time. And today we are welcoming Mia Manansala and her brand new book, Blackmail and Bibinka, which came out in October from the fabulous Berkeley Books. And look at that really adorable cover. You can see Christmas. I can't figure these out. It's Christmas, and we'll talk about that in a minute. Let me tell you a little bit about Mia, and then I'll stop talking, I promise. Mia Manansala is a writer and book coach from Chicago who loves books, baking, and badass women. I think it's a bumper sticker. I totally do. She uses humor and murder, those two things that are like, okay, how can that be? To explore aspects of the Filipino diaspora, queerness, and her millennial love for pop culture. She is the winner of the 2022 Anthony Award for Best First Novel, 2022 Macavity Award for Best First Novel, 2021 Agatha Award for Best First Novel, 2018 Hugh Holton Award. And now I want you to hear this journey, because this is, I should do it the other way. She also won the 2018 Hugh Holton Award, the 2018 Eleanor Taylor Bland Crime Fiction Writers of Color Award, the 2017 William F. Deek Malice Domestic Grant for Unpublished Writers, and the 2016 Mystery Writers of America Helen McCloy Scholarship. And you see how, if you read those awards the other way, this is step by step by step, Mia convincing people by her skill and by her talent that she knew what she was doing. So all the way from getting a scholarship at Malice to winning the Agatha Award for Best First Novel. That is quite the journey. And Renee is saying congratulations on your award. But wait, there's more. She was shortlisted for the 2021 Goodreads Choice Award for Mystery Thriller and the 2021 Chirby Award for Fiction by the Chicago Review of Books. She's also a 2017 Pitch Wars alum, which we are grateful for that, and 2018-2020 mentor. A lover of all things geeky, Mia spends her days procrastinating, playing JRPGs. You know what that is, right? I thought it was something about a missile, and dating Sims, reading cozy mysteries and diverse romance, and cuddling her dogs Gumiho and Max Power. So Janine is saying, rocking it, Mia. JRPG, Japanese
role-playing games. It's a type of video game that I really love.
It's a video game. It's video. So it's video, like not that you're actually dressing up with avatars.
No.
Okay.
It's like on a console playing games.
Is it so it's fun?
Yeah. Yeah, I've been really into, like, video games and other, like, geeky stuff like that. So, like, the novel I mentioned with the one that never sold was me tapping into my geeky side. It was called Death Comes to Comic-Cons. It was about going, a murder at a comic book convention. Because ever since I was a child, I've really been into, like, comic books and video games and cartoons and, like, that kind of, area of pop culture.
Hmm. And I think it's interesting because we are so pleased that you decided to write the Tita Rosie's kitchen culinary cozies. But I mean, it seems like there's an audience for that book. Maybe
Mhm.
someday. Maybe someday. Anyway, well, thank you for Blackmail and Bibinka came out from Berkeley on October the 4th, and we and Berkeley are giving away a copy of this. Well, not this book because I'm keeping, but another copy of this book for you here on Crime Time. If you just leave a question or a comment or a general adulation for Mia, and we will try to get to all of your questions at the end of the show. You will be entered to win a copy of Blackmail and Bibinka. And Darlene is saying. Darlene is saying Comic-Con events are so interesting and fun. Yes, indeed. My stepson is the head of a company called Beetle and Grimm. We'll talk about that, which is in that same world. Anyway, let's go on and talk about Blackmail and Bibinka. You were saying it's a cozy mystery. If people don't know what a cozy mystery is, how would you describe that?
So the way I've been my books especially, which was kind of like the inspiration for how I approached it, is I tell a lot of people they're kind of like Hallmark movies, but with dead bodies. Just because, there's a lot of like talk about like, oh, what constitutes a cozy mystery? Is Agatha Christie technically a cozy writer? That kind of a thing. One of the few things that we agree on, we as like other writers, is that cozy mysteries tends to not have any graphic violence, sex, or bad language on the page, right? So like, yes, there are murders, but there's nothing. It's not going to go into detail, right? Like I don't have to worry about, oh, do I have to like research blood splatter and like it's not into that level. That's With contemporary cozies, it's very common to have a romantic subplot. It's not necessary, but it's very common, hence me using the Hallmark thing. And just like with those kind of romances, there's going to be like a happy ending, right? Justice will be done. It's not going to be anything too gory or that'll keep you up all night. It's kind of a fun escape where you're like, oh, that was nice.
Well, I think a cozy mystery too, and you do it so beautifully in Blackmail and Bibinka, is there's a community of people to whom something has disturbed the equilibrium of that pretty much loving community of people. Someone has entered that community or left that community, or something has happened in that community, and the main character, because of her sort of pluckiness and wit and intelligence and knowledge, she has to be smart. Is the one who manages to figure out the solution and bring everything back into equilibrium.
Yeah, because the protagonist is always an amateur sleuth, right? And it's one of those like, what would make an ordinary citizen, especially like in my case, which is I have a rather young protagonist. She's 25 years old. She's a 25-year-old cookie baker. It's like, what makes this 25-year-old cookie baker decide that she can go solve mysteries? And of course, the idea is that it's almost always a crime that hits close to home. That if it does not involve you personally, when in the first book it does involve her personally, she becomes the suspect in her ex-boyfriend's murder, and it threatens to shut down her aunt's restaurant and the family's livelihood and all that. So all the cozies tend to, again, the idea of community is really important, because it doesn't have to be in a small town. It's just, those are just kind of the cliche. But there has to be like ripple effects. Like, what you throw that stone, like, you on the surface it looks just so like, oh, this is such a boring sleepy town, nothing ever happens, and then obviously this shakes everything up.
And there's so much fun to read. Blackmail and Bibinka is so endearing and so engaging. And at the center of it, though, is a solidly good mystery. One of the things that you do so brilliantly in this book is your main character, Lila. What we worry about as crime fiction authors is that people will say, why didn't she just call the police? Why is she doing this? And you were talking a little bit about that it has to be something that's very personal. And in a series, there has to be a reason that something personal would happen to this amateur sleuth over and over. Talk
Hmm.
a little bit about that battle if you faced that yet.
Yeah, all the time. So with the first book, it's because you're introducing, obviously it should be her, and it also affects her aunt and her grandmother, who are the people who raised her, because her parents died when she was young. She was raised by her paternal aunt and grandmother. So the first book deals with that. The second book is her cousin Bernadette, who is kind of like a frenemy, like your friend enemy, like your rival, right? They grew up competing against each other all the time. They love each other, but they don't necessarily like each other.
Uh,
um but they kind of have to put those differences aside when her cousin gets accused of murder. And the third book, but when I say cousin, I'm using in the sense of, a lot of my books are like, what constitutes family, because family's not always blood, right? Like found family can be a really big, and so in many communities, not just the Filipino community, but because I'm speaking for that, um we use a lot of titles, and so I grew up calling everyone tita or tito, which is like aunt and uncle respectively in Tagalog. And there's also like other honorifics based on like which kind of like generation you are. And I didn't realize so much later, like, oh, you are not my literal
oh,
aunt or uncle. You are just of this particular generation, and you're close enough to the family that we would consider you a cousin or an aunt or an uncle, or like an honorary grandparent. We would just call you that, even though we're not necessarily blood related. You're still my family. And so like that, I show that in my books. But in book 3, it's her actual flesh and blood cousin, her Tita Rosie's only child, who goes to the family 15 years ago and came back to kind of stir up trouble.
which is great. I love that when Ronnie walks in, we know everything is about to change. Talk a
Mhm.
little bit about Shady Palms, the community where this takes place, and about the core family that inhabits your books.
So Shady Palms is a fictional town in Illinois that's a couple of hours outside of Chicago. I wanted a fiction. People ask like, "Oh, why didn't you like set it in Chicago, or an actual small town that exists in the?" And I wanted a little bit of flexibility, because with a series, sadly, we never really know when it ends, right? I don't get to tell, like, I don't get to be like, "Hey, Berkeley, guess what? I want to write 10 books and I'm gonna plot it until." No, I I just get lucky if they decide to extend the series, and I can write more. If they choose not to, it ends when it ends. So not knowing how long this would go on, I wanted a town that I could kind of expand on and shift around and change, to meet my needs with, each coming book, rather than something that's static. And it's like, well, everyone knows that, in Chicago, east is the lake. I can't say the east side. That doesn't make sense. Um, I wanted the flexibility of being able to mold the town the way I wanted to. And whenever people tell me that they love the world of Shady Palms and it feels so real to them, I'm always so relieved and so flattered, because for me, descriptions are the worst. They're the last thing I like adding in, because I'm not a very visual person. I'm not great at describing things. And so with very early drafts of the book that would become Arsenic and Adobo, I was sharing it with my critique group. And one of them very correctly was like, Mia, like your dialogue is great. These characters are really well fleshed out, but I feel like they're like in a void. Like they're just like floating through space. Like you keep saying small town. What does that mean? I don't have a sense of where things are. And I was like, oh, she's right. Again, I was born and raised in Chicago. My idea of a small town is probably very different than people who actually live in small towns. And so she started like asking me these questions that like I would never have thought. She was like, well, like what's the population? What does the geography look
Oh,
like? What's like the demographic? And I was like, oh no. Oh, I should really,
that's
and
very
so
instructive, though, isn't it? Darlene was saying you're an urban planner.
yeah.
That's so funny, Darlene, because that's exactly what Mia is doing. You're creating the movie in your mind of this
Hmm.
town, and you need to communicate that to your readers, because we can make it up a little bit, but we can't make it up totally. So what did
Yeah.
you come up with? What are the key elements of Shady
So
Palms?
when I started answering the questions, I'm like, oh well, like I wanted it like not so ridiculously small that the fact that all these dead bodies are gonna like be a problem, but I wanted it to still feel tight knit enough. So I was like, okay, less than 20,000 people, and I knew I wanted to have like a river, and I wanted like so I did started jotting all these things down, and she was like, oh, that kind of sounds like Ottawa, Illinois, which is right by Starve Rock State Park, if anyone is kind of familiar with the area. And I was like, oh, okay, that's cool. And I went on a research trip there. I did a writing retreat, and I was like, oh, this is perfect. So like geographically, I used Outer Illinois as like a basis, just like for that kind of feel. But demographically, it's based on. It's also very heavily based on Chicago suburbs. So particularly with the demographics, I was thinking of this suburb called Skokie,
Mhm.
which is just outside of Chicago, not too far from Lincolnwood, where you where you were mentioning. If
Yeah,
if that was
that's where
around
I
the
grew up. That's where I grew up.
yeah.
And Lincoln was when we were talking earlier that
Yeah.
I lived on Cherry Street in Lincolnwood, which sounds like a Dick and Jane book a little bit. And so, but the key of your book, the people who live in Shady Palms, we're talking about
Mhm.
Blackmail and Bibinka, out now from Berkeley Books by me and Manansala. This is books 3 in the series, but you can read them in any order. You absolutely can, and we can talk about that in a minute. But talk about your main character, Lila, and
Mhm.
who else populates this book.
So Lila Macapagal is my protagonist, and in the first book, she has classic like big fish in a small pond syndrome. She grew up in this small town. She always thought she could do more, so she leaves to Chicago to go to university, um, and is gone for like years. Like does not visit people. Like she'll keep in touch, but she hasn't been home in years and years and years, and until her poor choice in romantic partners and her aunt's kind of like business emergency kind of coincide. So she kind of flees back to her hometown to kind of get things done. So Lila is a young woman whose dreams are kind of knocked off balance, and she's trying to find her way again. It's almost like like an adult coming of age, like
Mhm.
with that's who she is, and she's just trying to get her footing back again. She is, as I mentioned, her parents are deceased, so she was raised in a somewhat strict, but also very loving family with her paternal aunt, who's the Tita Rosie. Tita means aunt, as I mentioned before. That's what the series is named after, and her grandmother. And again, so it's very much like her blood family is very small, right? It's those three in this multi-generational household, but her actual family is huge. Like so like a very popular group of characters are the calendar crew,
Yes.
who are her godmothers, um April,
May,
May, and June, which
April,
is why
May, and June. Hilarious.
yeah, they're not related. They just happen to be named that, which is the calendar crew. They're the typical gossiping aunties who love her, judge her, to help her along the way.
And they each have viewpoints about things and beliefs that are,
Mhm.
absolute.
Yes, pretty much. And and then just again, there's just like a wide cast. Like she has like her best friend who's been, very ride or die, very loyal, has always been there for her. There's romantic interests who are introduced in the first book, and
So she
yeah.
stays there because
Mhm.
she decides to, what happens?
Yeah, so it's not really spoilers. I mean, the fact that there's a series lets you know. At the end of the book, she kind of comes to this because in the first book, she's kind of just biding time, hoping she can get things together and leave again. But near the end, she realizes that you know, she doesn't have to live in Chicago to make her dreams come true. And that, maybe the people who have always been there for her and always cared for her, that's where her home really is. At least for now, because again, 25, right? Things can change. But at where she is in her life, she is where she needs to be to continue to grow.
And what
Um,
is she doing? I'll let you talk about that a little bit.
so in the first book, she's helping with her family's restaurant. In book 2 and on, she opens up a cafe with her best friend and another business partner.
And so the food, what I'm sort of going for is that food is at the center of this in
Mhm,
every way. The restaurant that she opens, the tea shop, the bakery, every place
mhm,
is just gloriously, voluptuously food oriented. And you cannot read Blackmail and Bibinka or any of the other 2 books without really wanting to taste all of the food that is described in this so gorgeously. And the names, let me show you all.
mhm,
One of the marvelous things about this book, one of the many, is that it has a glossary at the beginning and several pages of the names of food and other things, so that if you need to, you can check that out. There's, for instance, just gossip, which is very key. But you do this a great job, Mia, of contextually letting us know what something means, whether it's a phrase or whether it's food. Talk about how you developed that skill and why you and it's true, and why you decided how you do that.
It's a fine line, honestly, because it's like, yes, I wrote this for myself, but obviously other people need to read it, right? Who are maybe not going to be as familiar with the terms and the food and other certain aspects of the culture. But I also didn't want to like exoticize it, right? Because I write in first person. I'm in her head, so my protagonist would naturally know these things, right? It wouldn't be natural for her to just suddenly stop and be like, oh yeah, and then give like a full like dictionary definition, mid paragraph. So sometimes I can go around that where like, okay, she's introducing a new person to a certain food, like they're joining the family for a meal and she's explaining to them like, oh, this is this is that. So sometimes that's one of the ways I go around it, having a new person that she can explain it to, which also means I'm explaining it to the audience. Some of it is context, like I will not necessarily describe it one to one, but I will seed certain things in where like maybe you don't have the exact translation of something in your head, but you'll get the idea of like what it means. And then some things I just don't translate at all, just because like it's not necessarily to the plot that what that particular word or phrase means, but it's one of those like, if you know.
And also you make the reader feel really smart when they figure things out. I mean, I remember there's one tiny little bit, it's such a little thing where someone is not wanting to eat two things together.
Oh yes.
Someone says, that it's that one's sweet and that one's salty, and that's how you're supposed to do it. And someone says, well, I'm not going to eat that and that because that doesn't work. And they describe that. And so we know exactly how that would taste, even if we don't know exactly what it is. And that's a skill, that is a way that you have handled the food so gorgeously. But let's go back to the actual plot of this book. This, somebody was saying once that there are only two plots: someone goes on a journey or stranger comes to town. So this is Stranger Comes to Town. Talk a little bit about what the plot of this book, of this particular book, is.
So, as I mentioned before, any crime that's going to happen is going to have to happen so close to Lila's family. And in the previous books, I kind of seed in her cousin, her shady cousin, like gets name dropped here and there because he's the only son of her aunt. And in this book, he actually shows up again, and he had ghosted the family. He just left town without saying where he was going or why he was leaving, and then he just suddenly kind of shows up again, very prodigal son like, and is like, hey, I'm back, I'm not a screw up anymore, I bought this winery and I'm going to be part of the town again. And her aunt is obviously thrilled. Her aunt is probably like the kindest, like most loving, most nurturing person like in the world. And so having her son back, she no questions asked, she just wants to welcome him. But Lila knows better. she grew up with him and his get rich quick schemes and some other shadier aspects of his personality, and she's a little bit hesitant to kind of accept him. And she knows he's the type to just kind of like turn tail and leave, when things get bad. And she doesn't want her aunt to get her heart broken like that again. And of course, she's proven right when, one of his investors is murdered and he becomes the prime suspect in the death. And, she obviously gets involved because due to his, troubled past, he does not have great standing with the town's police department, particularly the current sheriff. Like they had a thing that I kind of like allude to, but I don't specifically say, just it's, a misspent youth, let's just say. And so she knows that they are not going to look too closely at this. They're going to take the easy way out because they already have, a vendetta against him. And so for her aunt, she will do what she can to try to get to the bottom of what actually happened.
And that is the essence of a cozy mystery, totally and completely. This is, one of the things about this book is that it's a really good mystery. And one of the things that makes a cozy be elevated, I think, is that you have all the elements of a cozy mystery, but underneath that, underneath the cooking and the baking and the family and the adorableness and the fun language and the banter and the terrific dialogue and the cute setting, is there's a really solid mystery under there. How do you work on that, and how do you balance the idea that a smart reader wants is
Mhm.
gonna see through it if you don't have that?
Ooh, revisions, revisions, revisions.
Mm.
I like all writing is revising for me. So, when I turn in my early drafts, it's pretty obvious to me like what interests me, because I am very much into the family drama and the food. Because for me, food, a plate of food is not just a plate of food. I can use the food in my books to say a lot of things about a character, their history, their backstory, the relationships of people around them. Um, you
Like
know,
how? Tell me how.
um,
What they eat and what they don't eat, what they prefer, what
yes, yeah, some of it, yeah. So a specific example I can think of is in my second book. Not that, I mean, this one does have some things, but I want to avoid spoilers.
yes.
So in my second book, there is a scene where Lila is having a really tough time. It's book 2 involves the town's beauty pageant that she was involved in when she was younger, and her deceased mother was a beauty queen in the Philippines who really really pushed her. And she's gone now, and so like there's this really fraught, unresolved grief and resentment and longing, and guilt, because like how can she feel this way about this woman who's gone, about her mother who's gone. And so her aunt knows that she's struggling, so she cooks her a special dish that her mom used to make her when she was younger, and she hasn't had it since she was like 8 years old, 10 years old, something like that. And she smells this dish, and like all she says is like, "Is that mommy's chicken?"
Oh.
And there's like so much in that scene.
Well,
Yeah.
because she obviously loved her mother. She
Mhm.
called her mommy.
Mhm.
She has the sense of, that that even the fragrance brings back a different time. Also, that she's loved now because someone recognizes that would
Mhm.
affect her. And you get all
Mhm.
that from chicken.
Yeah, it's one scene, it's a plate of chicken, but it's so much more to because there are things that, not everyone has a great relationship to food, sadly, right? And so that plate of chicken is a wonderful memory, but it's also a very, because of her relationship with her mother in the past, it's almost like a tortured relationship with that plate
Oh,
of chicken. So like there's just a lot going on there that maybe is not necessarily conducive to the mystery, but it tells you so much about the character and a backstory without me having to be like, well, back in the day, this, you know
yes,
what I mean?
exactly. Yes.
So like it's kind of a shortcut to a character backstory in many ways, is how
Yes,
I use this in
but what you write is character-driven mysteries, and
Yes.
that is part of that. So, but the mystery still has to be there.
Mhm. So, like,
Um,
when I draft, I had like, because I plot ahead of time,
uh,
because again, 8 to 9 months between books, and so, like, I plot ahead of time. I don't necessarily follow it exactly, but I know I have a roadmap. So my first draft is very bare bones. The characters tend to be fairly well developed, but the mystery is like I have these beats, and I'm like, okay, let me fill them in the second time to have them make sense. Because like I know these things have to happen. Now, how can I actually connect it so that the reader can like, play, so I can play fair with the reader? It's not just like, wait, what? You never said that, or we didn't actually see this happen, or that kind of a thing.
that's fascinating. That is
Hmm.
really fascinating. That's a good roadmap. And then in the third draft, you're putting it all together and making the transitions work
Hmm.
and putting in a theme.
Exactly. Yeah. I'm making sure that there's a character arc there. I'm making sure that there's no plot holes. I usually do try to have a theme. Like, okay, like, am I like, is the theme what I thought it was? Because with book 2, it was not what I thought it was, which is why I had so much trouble writing it. Book 3 was, oh, it's beautiful and easy. Because I knew what I wanted it to be about. And so I was able to like, okay, does this thread go throughout the whole book?
Yes.
If it does, awesome. Where can I make it stronger to make it even better? Or like, okay, if it doesn't, where am I lacking? Was I wrong? Is it actually about something else? So like my books especially come alive during revisions.
I love that. I think it's like a treasure hunt to see what works and what doesn't work, and it's just so much fun. You said great book and great food, says Shannon Hansen. Sounds great, absolutely. So you said you were doing procrastinating. How does your real life cooking converge with the book cooking?
Yeah. Yes, that is a Jane Austen mug.
You hold that up so Margaret in the back room is
Oh,
a huge Jane
yeah.
Austen fan.
Yes, it's a
Oh,
yeah.
are you a Jane Austen fan as well?
Yes, yeah.
So back to
Mhm,
that's a
mhm.
story for another day.
Yeah.
Go back to your cooking and your baking and how that connects with your book.
So, for me, I'm not big on cooking, like, the day-to-day tedium of, like, cooking for sustenance is just exhausting to me, it's just like, "I made a healthy meal yesterday, what do you mean I have to do it again?" You know? But, I enjoy baking, um, and I like cooking for a crowd, so I host the holidays at my house, so, like, I
Oh,
like cooking for people. So, so in my books, food as a love language is actually a kind of one of the main themes that you'll see, like, in every single book, right? It's not just like, "Oh, food is delicious." It's like, food is how I let you know that I love you and that I care about you. And that, again, that can be shown in many different ways. And I'm kind of that person too, so, but with baking, a lot I have just Google Doc, like a Google Doc that is pages and pages long of the things that I want to make. So for those of you who are new to my series, again, so it centers around a family-owned Filipino restaurant, which has more, traditional, shall we say, because of their older generation, Filipino savory dishes, which is what the aunt makes, and sweets and desserts, which is what the grandmother makes. And Lila has more of a fusion approach to her desserts. So she likes to take ingredients that are maybe traditionally thought of as Filipino, such as ube, which is a purple yam, traditionally used in the Philippines. Oh, excuse me. And putting a spin on them, like in the first book, there's a recipe for ube crinkles, which is a type of cookie, which is, well, probably one of my most popular recipes. Or she'll take like a Filipino dessert and give it, or she'll take what we think of as an American dessert and give it a Filipino twist. So she'll do a lot of that.
this is
In
the
the
time to ask what bibingka is.
Oh, yes, bibingka. So bibingka is one of many rice cakes that we have in the Philippines, and this one is traditionally served around Christmas time. Which with this book, it's also a holiday book. It's a Christmas book, and it's served year round, but it's especially known in Christmas time. And like street vendors, it's the mold is lined with banana leaves, and then like the rice cake batter is pulled in, and it's kind of like grilled over charcoal, and so like you smell this scent when you're walking around, and then it's covered with like butter and sugar and some other toppings, and so it's very evocative of the Christmas season in the Philippines. And so so that's how like I choose. So people ask like, how do you know what food to choose? So with the titles, one, I will choose a food that if I don't already know how to make it, I think it's simple enough for me to at least attempt it. Because if it's a title food, I feel like it has to have a recipe in the back, and I'm the one who creates the recipes. And bibingka
You
took
are? You're the
me
one who creates the recipes?
yes, and the bibingka took me a while to get right. But it's my favorite. It's like, oh, I'm not being lazy. I'm not procrastinating. I'm researching, right? Because these are the recipes that go in the book. So I'm technically still working on my writing. Yeah.
I think that's marvelous. I think this is Janine is saying, "Oh, I am drooling," and we are all drooling over the recipes and the mystery and the wonderful characters in Blackmail and Babinka. And I know you all have. We have talked so long, Mia. It's great. You're so endearing and so charming, just like this book. It is absolutely irresistible. Is there another one in the works?
Yes, I'm waiting for my editors to give me edits on book 4. Book 4 is titled Murder and Mammon, and it's scheduled to come out next October. I don't have a specific date yet, but that's book 4, and I'm also currently drafting book 5. So I originally had a 3-book contract with Berkeley, and luckily Arsenic and Adobo did well enough that they extended my contract for another 3 books. So I am contracted until book 6, and then fingers crossed, who knows where that goes.
I mean, that's a juggle. And let me ask you this before we, as Margaret is collecting the questions. It's a juggle, isn't it? As you were saying earlier in the interview, to think about, you don't really know when the series will be over. So do you have an arc for you? When you have an arc for each book, do you have an
Mhm.
arc for the whole series, or is it just like life? You're going to see.
I do mini arcs, right? So with the first 3, I was thinking both like character journey wise, and then also because of it's a romantic subplot, that I wanted to, because I was thinking of the whole Hallmark movie, the
Sure.
rom-coms with dead bodies kind of idea. So in the first book, I introduced a love triangle. In the second book, she's leaning a certain way, and by the third book, she's made a decision. Just because, if my series wasn't renewed, I wanted it to feel like tied up enough where like, oh, okay, this subplot has been addressed. The where Lila's in a good place now, but there is a possibility for more, is how I left, the end of book 3. And now that I have this other 3-book series, now I have to have a new mini arc where I'm just like,
On the
oh,
other hand, but
yeah, so
wait,
that's
there's
where I'm
more.
going. Exactly. So it helps to think in that way, but now it's just like, oh geez. Which is one of the reasons I made her so young, right? Like she has so much to learn. And there's many different ways to grow, and we don't always, growth is not always forward, right? It takes some time. So I'm trying to think what logical, problems which you have. We're like, okay, this area of your life is good, but this is a mess and needs to be addressed. So that's what I'm working on right now.
And that's one of the things that makes these books so much fun. She is completely our friend, and her family is completely our friend. And we wish we could be at the restaurant and the Bruja Cafe to join in the fun, but we can do it through Blackmail and Bibinka and all of Nia Manansala's wonderful, cozy mysteries. Let's take a couple of questions in the brief time we have. Oh, Mary Garrett. This is such a good Mary Garrett question. What food makes you feel loved?
Oh, wow. Ooh. So my father was the cook in the family. He was the one that I learned the idea of food as a love language. So it's like similar, so like, similar to the Tita Rosie character. Like it's not one to one, because people always ask like, oh, are these real people in your life? No, I take a quality or a characteristic in people that I know, and then I create a character around that. So
Because
so
Renee is asking, is she based on
oh
you?
yeah. So with the Tita Rosie character, I took the idea of like my dad, who, like lots of like, to be cliche, like stereotypical, but like he was very much like an old school, Filipino man, like where he did, I love yous were not things that were said out loud. It was not a physically affectionate thing, right? Hugs and kisses and, like what we think of as like the typical like American, TV idea of what a love in a family is. But he worked really, really long hours, and then he would come home, and on the weekends he would make a feast for the family. I grew up in a large multi-generational home with my maternal grandparents, me, my parents, 2 brothers, 2 cousins, aunts and people kind of coming through, and he would cook for hours and hours to feed us. And that was, and when you're younger, you don't really think about it. When I got older, it's like, oh, that was how he showed love and care. Like that was his way. And so whenever I think about it, it's just anything my dad, sadly he's gone. He passed away at the end of 2018. So he wasn't able to see that. I dedicated my first book to him. But when I think of food, it's the food that he made, particularly his special dishes. Like he was really known for, oh geez, it's so like things that seem so simple, but are just like really well known, like beefsteak, which is like a kind of like Filipino, um like it's like it's a Filipino steak and onions, but it's like a very cheap like because it's called like bistec a la pobre, like a poor person's, because it's
I
really
bet it
tough.
smelled wonderful.
Yeah, because it's like a really tough cut of meat, but you take the time and the care to make it really delicious, things like that. Because I guess as I mentioned before, I don't love cooking. I tend to go for like the faster route, whereas the dishes he did took time. So the dishes that I'm like where I can look at it and be like, oh, you took time and care, those are the ones that make me feel loved, because like it's, you didn't rush this. You wanted this to taste how it was supposed to. And you did this for me, like that kind of a thing.
I always think it's like writing a book, though. You have an idea of creating something, then you have the fun of creating the thing, the sort of chemistry of watching it come together, whether it's a book or cooking, and then you can offer it to someone that you love, saying, I made this book for you, I made these cookies for you. And also then the fun of seeing them enjoy it, which is what we do with your marvelous. Do we have time for one more question? Do you go on book tours when your book is published, or would you go on book tours?
So I wasn't really like for the first book, I wasn't able because 2021 is when I debuted, right? Debuted Independent. So for this third book, it was the first time I actually was able to go on tours. And only because I was very lucky that apparently October is really big for literary festivals, like book festivals. And so I was invited to a lot of festivals. So I got to travel that way because festivals reached out to me and either they kind of covered the travel or my publisher was willing to cover the travel because it was a really good opportunity. But in general, publishers don't really do that. They don't put together book tours the way, in the past. And I don't really have the money for that kind of thing. So I will tour within the Chicagoland area. But outside of that, it's can I connect it to a larger event where I'm being where my travel and accommodations are being paid for, so like
and it's interesting too, because think of the thousands of people who will see this interview and and you're sitting at your desk, so it is an interesting interesting balance. We are going to, Renee is saying thank you, Mia, for being on Crime Time. That's great. Renee is asking a good last question, really good one, and it's a hard one. Who are some of your favorite authors?
So if we're talking mystery, because it's Crime Time, a lot of them are you can find like on the part of a group that I'm also part of, called Crime Writers of Color. So if you are looking to diversify your reading lists, I highly suggest going to our website. We have like a list of them. So of course, like Kelly Garrett, who is my mentor, a wonderful writer. Her latest book, Like a Sister, came out earlier this year. Kelly Garrett, Gigi Pondian, who writes like amazing locked room mysteries and like fun adventures. She does a lot of genre bending in some of her earlier work. Alex Segura also does some genre bending. So his latest one, Secret Identity. So I mentioned before I love comic books. So his latest one is a noir set in the comic book industry of the 70s.
With the comic actually in it.
Yeah, well, so like there's like little like interstitial pieces of like the comic in there. Someone who debuted the same year as me, Nekesa Afia. If you like historical mysteries, she writes the Harlem Renaissance mystery. So Dead Girls came out last year. Harlem Sunset came out this year. It's set in 1920s Harlem, and it follows a young Black lesbian who would love to live a normal life and just keeps getting pulled into these horrible messes.
With not those gorgeous covers she has.
Fantastic cover, but not a cozy, just in case people, because again, you look at the cover, you're like, oh, this is great. The first book has a serial killer, so FYI.
Exactly. That is a wonderful selection. And it's Crime Writers of Color. Is it CWOC.com or is it crimewritersofcolor.com?
For the website, it's crimewritersofcolor.com. And it's,
look at that, Margaret in the back room, put that right up. She is such a genius, that Margaret. Love it. We are out of time, so let's draw for the winner. We have talked way too long. I love this. Thank you for taking all this time. Here is the wheel of fun, and we will draw. And isn't this great? We will see who wins a copy of Blackmail and Bibinka. And the winner is Lynn Hunt. I think she won the last time. Didn't you just win about half an hour ago? I think you did. And this shows you. Let's just draw one more time so we can share the wealth here today. Lynn, if you didn't win last time, I think you did. If you didn't, let me know. We'll send you this as well. And okay, the real winner for today is Susan Frank. That's so marvelous. Yay. Thank you, Susan, for being here today. And you will get some instructions about how to contact me so I can contact Berkeley, and you will get a copy of Mia's Blackmail and Bibinka, you lucky reader. Before you go, Mia, let me just tell you all, next Tuesday at 4 p.m. ET, here on Crime Time on A Mighty Blaze, a totally uncozy book, which is You Never Said Goodbye by Luca Vest. And as it says on the cover, the day she died was only the beginning. And I can tell you indeed that this is a chilling thriller, not one bit cozy, but absolutely page turning. You can see my bookmark is in this, so I'm not going to tell you anything more about it because I'm just beginning this book. We will talk to Luca Vest next week at 4 p.m. right here on Crime Time on A Mighty Blaze. And today, thank you, Mia Manansala, for joining us here on Crime Time. We hope you had fun.
Yeah, thanks for having me. It's always great chatting with you, Hank.
Thank you. You too. You too. And cannot wait to read your next book. I hope you will come and visit us. And as for you, you all have a wonderful rest of the week. And we will see you here next Tuesday at 4 p.m. ET. Until then, remember, it is always safe inside a book. And we are so glad you have joined us today. See you next time.